Gonzaga's ceiling will once again be determined by how successful the big man on the block performs. So the question is, can Graham Ike lead this team to a national title?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Well, today is our season in review episode on Graham Ike. Yes, it's June, and we're still doing the season in review episodes. Had a lot of news in the early part of this offseason, so still getting around to talking about these. We're going to talk about Graham Ike's history prior to ending up at Gonzaga last year. We're going to talk about his season last year, the second half in particular, where he really took a step forward and dominated for this team. We're going to talk about his future, what his role is going to look like next year, how many more years he's going to be in Spokane in a Gonzaga uniform, his NBA potential, all of that coming up on today's show. We're going to wrap up the show talking about the Olympics. Filip Petrusev has been named to the Serbian roster. We're going to talk about how many other Zags we are expecting to see in Paris this summer, all that coming up to close out the show. We'll start with the history for the big lefty with the Gonzaga Bulldogs, Graham Ike. He's 6'9" big, originally from Aurora, Colorado, and he was a non-prospect coming out of high school. He had some injury issues in high school and just wasn't on the radar as really a Division I prospect at all, which is shocking to think about now, but it's not. I mean, he's not even the most recent big name Colorado unheralded prospect who turned into a superstar. Dalton Connect comes from the same area, was a guy who spent junior college, Northern Colorado, then at Tennessee. Now he's going to be one of the first 10 players selected in the NBA draft. So clearly we're not scouting that Colorado area as well as we should be, because Graham Ike has been a phenomenal college basketball player. He was unranked as a high school prospect, like we said, ended up committing to Wyoming. Coach Jeff Linder brought him in there. His first season was that COVID year, 2020, 2021. So the combination of COVID killing a lot of the games and some injury issues that lingered into Graham's freshman year in college allowed him to only play 12 games as a true freshman at Wyoming. He started 7 of those 12 games, played about 21 minutes per game, and in other news that won't shock anybody who's watched Graham Ike play, he was productive in those 12 games, 11.2 points a game, about 5.5 rebounds, shot about 61% on two-pointers. And then he returned for the 2021-22 season, and that is when Graham Ike became a household name for those college basketball enthusiasts, at least a household name for Mountain West basketball fans, certainly. In that 21-22 season, Graham Ike played all 33 games. He played about 32 minutes a night, and he was an absolute beast on the block. 19.5 points per game, 9.6 rebounds, 1.3 assists, basically averaged 20 and 10. To average that in the NBA makes you an all-star caliber player. To do it in college with 40-minute games is extraordinary. He was less efficient on two-pointers, which is not surprising considering his volume was way up, about 51.5% on twos. He was 27% from three. Granted, that was 3 of 11, very tiny sample size there. About 72% from the free throw line. He was an all-Mountain West player that year. He had 8 games of 25 or more points and 10 or more rebounds. Remarkable productivity. He had a 33.10 rebound game against Boise State, 29.15 rebound game against New Mexico on 11 of 13 shooting. And after the season, everybody projected that Graham Ike coming into 22-23 would be the Mountain West Player of the Year. He was a consensus pick to be that player. Unfortunately, a foot injury kept him out for the entirety of the 22-23 season. There was expectation that he would return around midseason. The foot injury lingered. There was a setback. He ultimately just took the entire year off. There's a phenomenal article from Theo Lawson of the Spokesman Review written a few months ago about Graham Ike's journey. Lots of quotes from his old coaching staff, from Graham himself, about how he spent that time where he was injured, where he was unable to play. He spent it learning. He's a film nut. watches basketball all the time, learns about like movement. He watches film of like Hakeem Olajuwon. He watches film of Drew Timme. Like he watches big men to learn how to move, to learn how to get better, to hone his craft. He is an absolute workhorse and utilized the time where he was not able to be on the floor to his advantage. And after that season, where he did not play for Wyoming, he fairly quickly hit the transfer portal and quickly ended up in a Gonzaga uniform. The staff was enamored with his work ethic. They brought him in basically right around the same time they brought Ryan Nembhard in, two huge transfer portal additions that they got buzz at the time. Don't get me wrong, I was still hosting the show at the time. I remember the buzz, the excitement, but nationally, there was not a lot of recognition for this Graham Ike and Ryan Nembhard duo. Not as much as there should have been, considering what we saw from this team in the second half of this most recent season. So he had a boot on during off-season work. He didn't play in Craziness in the Kennel. There was some concern that he would miss the start of the year, some panic by people who knew that he'd missed an entire year. He has a foot injury. Those things kind of linger for big men, but ultimately was a complete non-issue for Graham Ike last season for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. He played all 35 games for Gonzaga, about 24 minutes a game, 16.5 points, 7.5 rebounds, about an assist per game, a little under a block per game as well, 0.7 on that. 62.2% on 2-point shots. That's the most efficient mark of his career. 36.8% from three, 7 of 19. Again, not a huge sample size, but the most efficient mark of his career. Ike also shot 78.4% from the free throw line, which is, you guessed it, the most efficient mark of his career. Graham Ike was the most efficient version of himself last year at Gonzaga. We talk about this a lot on this podcast, and I typically apply it to guards, but it's a Ryan Woolridge effect of sorts. With Woolridge, the reason I use him as an example is he was not a good three-point shooter at North Texas, but when he got to Gonzaga and he was in an offense where there was other scorers around him and he wasn't the focal point of opposing defenses, he got more open looks that allowed him to be more efficient. It doesn't work quite as well with Graham Ike because when he was at Wyoming, he posted up on the block, they got him the basketball, and he turned and scored. At Gonzaga, he posted up on the block, they got him the basketball, and he turned and scored. Obviously, it's more complicated than that. I'm not going to pretend that it's that simple, but I do think for Ike that having better teammates around him, having better coaching staffs around him, and just him getting an opportunity to work on his game and watch tape and learn and grow and evolve in that season where he was out allowed him to be a better version of himself on the basketball court for the Zags. All WCC, was not selected as WCC Player of the Year when he had a very strong case for it, was not selected for WCC Newcomer of the Year when he very clearly should have been selected for that. He did start the season a little bit slow, but ultimately right around the San Diego State game, and that was when there was a conversation where Mark Few basically told him, hey man, you need to start demanding the basketball. You need to start kind of taking ownership and being a more focal point of the offense. Like we need you to demand the ball and get the ball and score. And you could see the transition happen. In the first 11 games of Graham Ike's Gonzaga career, he averaged 13.5 points, 7.6 boards, shot 60.4% on twos, and took 9.3 field goal attempts per game. In the final 24 games of his Gonzaga career, which that split was right at the San Diego State game, he averaged 17.9 points a game, so about a 4.5 point difference. Same rebound, 7.3, basically the same. 62.7% on twos. So not only did he average about 4.5 more points per game, he was more efficient as a 2-point scorer, and his field goal attempts per game went from 9.3 in those first 11 games to 11.6 in those final 24 games. So we saw Graham Ike who wanted the ball more and who was more efficient with putting it in the hoop. He topped 20 points 15 times last year. He had 5 20-point double-doubles last year. He was fantastic against some of the best teams in the conference, 26-7 against Santa Clara on 9 of 13 shooting, 26-7 against San Francisco on 9 of 12 shooting. That was on the road. 24 points, 10 boards with 2 blocks at St. Mary's in that massive win in early March in Moraga. He averaged 16 points and about 10 rebounds and shot 68% on 2-pointers across Gonzaga's 3 NCAA tournament games. This dude was fantastic for the Zags in the big dance. He was fantastic for them in the WCC tournament. He got it done when this team needed it. And then the offseason rolled around, and like many other players on this team, he did not enter the transfer portal. He did not put his name in the NBA draft process. He is locked in from the minute last season ended. He is locked in, ready to take on another season for Gonzaga in 2024-25. And that's what I want to talk about, because Graham Ike does have 2 years of eligibility remaining. But is this season upcoming going to be his final year at Gonzaga? And if so, what might it look like for Gonzaga, for Graham Ike, for the city of Spokane? We're going to talk about all of that in just a second. First, I want to tell you all about today's sponsor, Gametime. It is minor league baseball season. I live out 10 minutes away from the Hillsboro Hops. I love getting an opportunity to go check out some minor league ball, and I love being able to make that decision at a last minute. And I have the luxury of doing that because Gametime is the perfect place to get last minute tickets. Prices on the Gametime app, they actually go down the closer that you get to first pitch. So with killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And if you're somebody who's concerned that you're going to buy tickets from a third-party app that are not going to be real, you're going to get turned away at the door, they're going to try to scan and it's not going to work and it's embarrassing, all of that stuff. One of the best things about Gametime is they have the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. And personally, I love having that peace of mind. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. You want to come hang out with me at a Hillsboro Hops game? 2 tickets, like $25. You can get them for $5 for 2 tickets to go to that game by creating an account and redeeming code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Folks, download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still wrapping up our Graham Ike season in review episode. We talked about his history from not regarded high school prospect in Aurora, Colorado, to all Mountain West caliber player, to injured, to a great second half in particular for Graham Ike last year with the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Want to look at now his role for this upcoming season, his future at Gonzaga, as well as his potential NBA future. We'll start with the role, and it's pretty simple. It's not going to change. There's not really any reason for Graham Ike's role to look any different this year than it did last year. There will be subtle differences. He's got different teammates around him. That changes the equation. But pretty much, especially the second half of the season, when he was told, hey, you're the guy, demand the basketball, when he was taking 11 shots a game, when he was averaging about 18 points, when he was doing that 63% from the field, that Graham Ike is who I expect Gonzaga is planning to have for the entirety of the 2024-25 season. That was when he figured it out. That was when him and Ryan Nembhard figured out their roles, and that was when Nolan Hickman, kind of also, but by de facto, figured out his role as the secondary creator, as the off-ball shooter. That was when Ben Gregg stepped into the starting lineup. I think that made a big difference in terms of floor spacing. It gave Graham Ike more room to operate on the block because while Anton Watson did shoot 40% from 3 last year, he's a low-volume shooter. And Ben Gregg is a high-volume shooter. So defenders are more likely to step out on Ben Gregg. It creates more room down low for Graham Ike to operate. So if we assume similar next year, we assume Michael Ajayi steps into that Anton Watson role as a decent, efficient three-point shooter, but kind of a low-volume shooter. Ajayi is more of an offensive player, and I think that could take away from Ike a little bit, but not much. Caleb Battle's going to create more 3-guard lineups for Gonzaga. That's not a bad thing for Graham Ike. In fact, it might be a good thing for Graham Ike in terms of being able to be ready for drives and dishes under the basket. Just different situations that Gonzaga's offense is going to be in by having Battle on the floor instead of Stromer or instead of Venters or somebody like that. And I think Ajayi is going to play some small ball 4 in those situations. You have the 4-out offense, which just gives – Ike, you can be able to drive a truck through the paint. And if Graham Ike's got the ball on the block with that much room and teams are unable to double team him just because of spacing, he's going to go to work. There are some things that Graham Ike needs to work on, and we just mentioned one of them. He's not very good at passing out of the double team yet. In fact, for his career, Graham Ike has a heck of a lot more turnovers than he does assists. He has never been particularly good in that area. For his career, he averages 1.1 assists per game and 2.3 turnovers. His dominant season at Wyoming, he averaged 3.3 turnovers per game and like 1.6 assists, I think is what it was. That's just not been a part of his game. Gonzaga can't really pull him away from the rim and do the Drew Timme thing or what the Sacramento Kings are doing with Domantas Sabonis in the NBA, where you give them the ball at the free throw line and you let them facilitate the offense. You could do backdoor cuts. You can do dribble handoff screens like that. Let the big man then turn and drive to the basket if they feel so inclined. Gonzaga was able to do that with Drew Timme. I don't really see that being an area for Graham Ike. He's low post, get him the ball down there. I don't want to say he's a black hole, but Gonzaga's had a lot of really good passers in the post, and Graham Ike just he was not that last year. If he can show improvement in that area, at least being able to kick it out of a double team. It doesn't have to lead to an assist. Kick it out of the double team, kick it to Nembhard or Hickman or whatever. Let those guys reset the offense. If they're open and they pull a three, great. If they're not open, set it up. Try again. Try to get the ball back to him. Try to do something different. Get the ball to Ajayi and let him create. Like, they have options. But for Ike, he needs to be able to get that ball out of his hands if he's getting double teamed. If he's not getting double teamed, every team in college basketball last year that chose not to double team him regretted it. So if they choose not to do that, he's going to just go to work. If they double team him, we want to see that growth. The other area of growth for Graham Ike is foul trouble. This is the biggest thing that he needs to work on. And we've seen in Gonzaga's offense, in their defense, in their systems, we've seen bigs gradually get better at this. Shemek Karnowski was a fouling machine his freshman year. By his senior year, he was elite at using his body, using his size to alter shots without getting called for fouls. He's one of the best examples, but he's not the only example. Many Gonzaga bigs have shown tremendous improvement throughout their careers at avoiding fouls and playing better straight-up defense. We will see if that is an area that Graham Ike can grow, because his 24 minutes per game last year was partly because Gonzaga had depth. They could play Braden Huff. They could play Ben Gregg. They had a lot of blowout games where they could sit Graham for large stretches of the game. It was probably a little bit injury prevention, especially early in the year in those blowout games. We don't need to play Graham Ike more than 20 minutes against Eastern Oregon or Mississippi Valley State, so we're not going to. But it was also him getting in foul trouble. This happened a lot. He'd sit for the last 12 minutes of the first half, the last 8 minutes of the first half, because he picked up his second foul quickly. He would pick up his third foul 3 minutes into the second half and have to sit until the under 8. And Mark Few chooses to be very conservative with how he plays players in foul trouble. He's always been like that. That's not going to change. And so for Graham Ike, if he wants to play more than 25 minutes a game, he is going to have to learn how to use his body and not commit stupid fouls. Sometimes they're emotional fouls. Sometimes they're moving screens. Sometimes it's just him being in a bad position defensively and throwing his hand down to try to alter a shot. It's a variety of different things, and they're going to need to get cleaned up, because a Graham Ike playing the difference between Graham Ike playing 24 and 28 minutes per game, with no disrespect to Braden Huff or Ben Gregg, those guys are great, but that's a big difference. If Gonzaga can get Graham Ike on the floor for 28 minutes pretty consistently, that is huge for what he's able to bring to this team. Want to talk about the future for Graham Ike at Gonzaga, because here's the deal. Graham Ike has only had 2 years count against him for eligibility purposes, meaning he has 2 years of eligibility still remaining to be a college basketball player. The 2021-22 season counted against him. The 2023-24 season last year counted against him. The 2020-21 season, where he only played 12 games, was also the COVID season. So regardless of whether he gets a red shirt, 12 games is kind of right in the middle. It doesn't matter. That year does not count against Graham Ike because it was the COVID year. And then the 22-23 season, where he did not play at all because of a medical red shirt, that does not count against him either. So he only has 2 years that he has played, meaning he has 2 years of eligibility remaining. But he's also been a college student for 4 years. Does he want to be a college student for 6 years? Probably not. I don't know. I haven't talked to him. He hasn't said anything publicly about this. Why would he? But I think there's a general expectation that Graham Ike might be playing his final year at Gonzaga this upcoming season. It is not set in stone. And it won't be. It won't be until he says it is. Because there's competing ideas here. On one hand, Graham Ike is probably not going to be an NBA player. And we're going to get to that in a second. No matter what he does this year, if he puts together an All-American season, leads Gonzaga to the Elite Eight, Final Four, national championship, and is like, I have done all that I can do in college basketball. I have achieved what I wanted to achieve. I have my degree. I've been here for 5 years. I am ready to move on to the professional ranks, whether that is the G League, overseas, whatever it may be. That totally makes sense. But he could also get paid to stay in college basketball. And that is the difference. We have seen players like Graham Ike who don't have a lot of NBA prospects because of their just the style of basketball that they play. They're not three-point shooting bigs. They're undersized guards. It's your Oscar Tshiebwe's, your Armando Baycots. Coleman Hawkins is coming back this year. Hunter Dickinson remains in school. Again, even guys like Mark Sears or RJ Davis from Carolina, Caleb Love at Arizona, like those guys are tremendous All-American caliber players who are staying in college because the NBA doesn't want 6'2" two guards. They don't. And so you're seeing more players who are like, well, I could just stay in college, be big man on campus, try to win a national championship, and make really good money. So Graham Ike's decision is not as simple as, well, he's been here for 5 years, he's ready to move on, versus I could stay, and he's maybe not improving his draft stock, probably not, because I don't think there's much draft stock to improve, quite frankly, but he can make a bunch of money and still be he can still make money playing college basketball. The goal is to make money playing basketball. If you can do that in college, and maybe your other options outside of college are overseas, why not stay in college? So that's kind of the tough decision. And it's going to depend on how this year goes. Obviously, if he dominates, if he all of a sudden becomes an elite, perimeter defender and three-point shooter and does get NBA attention, great. If he gets hurt, maybe he chooses to come back. Who knows? Like, there's a lot of factors that we haven't been able to determine yet. But it's definitely a big storyline kind of hanging over this Gonzaga team heading into the next season. I already mentioned some of the NBA future stuff, so I'll just be quick here. He shot 37% from three last year on 19 three-point attempts. Volume matters. He didn't have the volume. He's not proven himself to be a consistent, capable three-point shooter. He did shoot 78.5% from the free throw line last year, and that will help him. But ultimately, Graham Ike is an older prospect. He's got an injury history. I don't want to say he's injury prone because he's not, but he has an injury history. And he is a big man who doesn't really play around anywhere outside of the rim. He doesn't facilitate offenses the way that a Sabonis or a Jokic or those guys do. He's not a passer. And defensively, he's fine at Gonzaga. He's fine. He's great at hedging screens, which is how Gonzaga defends pick and rolls. But in the NBA, the modern NBA, I don't see him being an impactful defensive player. In fact, I see him being a liability defensively, and a liability on defense where his offensive contributions are a style that's not happening in the modern NBA. Graham Ike is a great low post scorer if he's in an offense where the entire offense is built around getting him the basketball on the block. There's not a single NBA offense built like that. And if they were, they would go get Drew Timme or Zach Edey or somebody like that. So with no disrespect to Graham Ike, of course, he's a phenomenal college player, but Mark Few and the Zags continue to put players in that position in their offense that tend to not be NBA players. They tend to not play the style that NBA teams want. So Graham kind of fits into that skill set. I don't see him being an NBA player, which is why it could involve him coming back for a 6th year of college basketball if he decides, hey, I'm just going to use my earning potential to make some money at Gonzaga, play basketball for them, and instead of leaving early and pursuing a professional career that is probably not going to happen in the United States. Well, folks, Filip Petrusev is the latest former Zag to represent his country in the 2024 Olympic Games in Paris, France this summer. We're going to talk about that and who else is on that list coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still any patents, still Locked On Zags podcast, moving away from our season in review episode on Graham Ike to instead talk about the Olympics coming up this summer in Paris, France. It is a basketball year for the Olympics, and there's going to be a lot of Gonzaga basketball love at the Olympics this year. So excited to get a chance to watch this, to cover it, to talk about it. The latest update, the Serbian men's national team roster has been announced. Filip Petrusev, former Gonzaga Bulldog, very briefly a Philadelphia 76er and Sacramento King, is with that team. The roster includes a lot of very good NBA talent, including multiple-time MVP Nikola Jokic. It also includes Nikola Jovic, who is on the Miami Heat. So the two Nikola Jays who are going to be on that team for Serbia. Bogdan Bogdanovic is on the roster. Alek Pokusevski is on the roster. This is a really good team. Serbia is a good basketball country. Having Jokic on the roster obviously helps in a significant way for this program, for this team, for this country as they go into the Olympic Games. And Petrusev, he gets a chance to be on this roster. He's not going to start at center. They got a guy for that already, but he's got an opportunity to represent his country in Paris. This is incredibly exciting for him. Like I mentioned, he was with the 76ers, played one game with them, got traded to Sacramento, played one game with Sacramento, played one game in the G League with the Stockton Kings, and then ended up getting released, goes back overseas, has actually spent this season playing for Olympiacos in Greece, which is where Nigel Williams-Goss plays. Kind of fun that Nigel Williams-Goss and Filip Petrusev were teammates this year, two guys who were did not overlap at Gonzaga. I think they were 3 or 4 years away from each other with Gonzaga, but still cool to see them getting an opportunity to be teammates. Petrusev played 11 games with Olympiacos, had 9 points, 4 boards, and 1.7 assists per game. Not the only former Zag representing a non-U.S. country in the Olympic Games this year. 2 players are expected. Now, Canada has not officially released their roster, but the expectation, near guarantee, is that there will be 2 former Zags on Canada's roster, Kelly Olynyk and Andrew Nembhard. You want to talk about 2 former Zags who did not overlap? There's a big gap between Kelly Olynyk's final year at Gonzaga and Andrew Nembhard's first year at Gonzaga, but those 2 are both going to be representing Team Canada. Coach Rick Carlisle, the coach for the Indiana Pacers, confirmed after Indiana's loss to Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals. He said Nembhard's going to play for Team Canada, and he confirmed it as much as he's capable of confirming it, and he should. He was so good in the NBA playoffs. Nembhard, it was incredible. He has put himself on like a legitimate path to stardom in the NBA. A second-round pick, a guy that before he was a second-round pick, most people weren't even sure if he was going to get picked in that NBA draft, is now legitimately, people are like, was he like actually Jalen Brunson? Like he is getting legitimate comps to all-star caliber players because he was flat out unbelievable in the playoffs this past year. Canada would be very dumb to not welcome him with open arms onto their roster. And Nembhard himself, who was invited last summer, who said, hey, I want to focus on my second year in the NBA. I'm not, it was just FIBA last year. It wasn't the full-on Olympics, of course. He has said he regretted that he wished he'd participated and represented his country. So he wants to represent Canada. Canada is saying, heck yeah, my dude, come join our team. So there's no mystery here, barring some kind of injury or a catastrophically bad decision by the Canada front office. He is going to be on Team Canada this year. And so will Kelly Olynyk, because Kelly Olynyk is basically Mr. Canada at this point. He is the team captain for Team Canada. He's represented Canada in so many different events, in FIBA events, World Cup events, Euro Cup event, like everything. Kelly Olynyk has been involved with Team Canada for over a decade. He is their guy. He's playing for the Toronto Raptors now, which I just love that he's got the opportunity to play for Toronto. He's from very close to Toronto growing up. He grew up a Raptors fan. This is very cool for him as an NBA player, but he is all dead set on being their starting center for this Canada roster. A lot of other really good players on this roster, including Zach Edey. Zach Edey and Kelly Olynyk are going to be the 2 bigs for this team. But the guard room for Canada, oh my goodness. Not only do they have Andrew Nembhard, they have Jamal Murray from the Denver Nuggets, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from the Oklahoma City Thunder, Andrew Wiggins is on the roster, Dylan Brooks is on the roster, Lou Dort, RJ Barrett, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Like, this is a really good and deep and talented Canada roster, and I'm incredibly excited to see how they do, especially with 2 Zags in the mix for this roster. Who else? Who else do we got? Well, Mark Few's going to be there. We know that. He's assistant coach for Team USA, the team that's going to be led by, LeBron James and Steph Curry and everybody else that's going to be on this phenomenal roster. He's coaching alongside Steve Kerr, alongside Tyronn Lue, alongside Eric Spoelstra. Mark Few's going to learn and grow and develop as a coach. He's going to get an opportunity to be around some superstar talent. This is just a really great opportunity for him. Very excited. I think we're all rooting for Team USA. Maybe not all of us, but a lot of us are rooting for Team USA. It'll be cool to have Mark Few and a Zag affiliated with that team. Japan has qualified for the Olympics, second Olympics in a row that they have qualified for. Of course, the previous Olympics were in Tokyo, so you get kind of grandfathered into being in that opportunity, but they are qualified now for 2024, and the question is whether Rui Hachimura is going to participate. And as of this recording right now, the most recent thing I saw was like 3 days ago, is an article on FIBA's website that said that Rui and the coach for Japan are going to meet and discuss. As you might recall, Rui participated with Japan in Tokyo in the 2020 Olympics, and what Japan didn't do very well, and he was really hard on himself about the team struggling, and it led to a pretty significant mental health spiral, and he ultimately missed about a half season in the NBA with Washington. He seems to be in a much better place now, has had a lot of success with the Lakers, but wouldn't surprise me if he opts out of doing this, even though it would be a pretty big blow for Japan if he were not able to or not willing to participate with that team. Domantas Sabonis will very clearly be on Lithuania's team, but they have to qualify. They are currently not qualified. They have to win some tournaments. It's going to be in early July, so we'll be talking about this in about 3 weeks or so. They're going to play in Puerto Rico. They're going to play Mexico and the Ivory Coast. If they win out of that little bubble, they will then play either Puerto Rico or Italy. If they win that, then they qualify for the Olympics. And if they qualify for the Olympics, Domantas Sabonis is going to be there alongside Jonas Valanciunas. This is a good team. They should qualify. Italy is going to be the big challenge for them in this group. But I would love it, obviously, if Lithuania makes it, because then we get another Zag we get to watch. Lithuania is a very good basketball country. It's a small country, but they've had a lot of success in the basketball landscape. And getting an opportunity to compete in the Olympics and see Sabonis on that floor would be a huge win for Gonzaga fans everywhere. Nobody else right now. Joel Ayayi, Killian Tilly did not make the French team. Some other players we haven't seen. Either the countries have not qualified or we haven't seen rosters yet. I don't think we're going to see anybody else. I knock on wood. Maybe somebody else will make it. Hopefully that's the case. But I think that what we have right now is the likely candidates to be representing Gonzaga and their home country at the Olympics this summer. There are going to be some Gales. We got to deal with that. And if you want to guess what country the St. Mary's players are representing, you are going to guess correctly because it is Australia. Jock Landale, Patty Mills, and Matthew Dellavedova all confirmed for Team Australia in the Olympic Games. Good for them. Good for that country. They got some other really talented players. Johnny Furphy, who was just on the Kansas team this last year. Josh Giddey is representing that team. There's some really good talent on that Team Australia roster, including some Gales. So we'll get a lot of chance to see some WCC talent out there on the floor in the Olympics this summer. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I so appreciate all of you hanging out with us here all the time. If you want to talk hoops more, join the Discord channel. It's free. There's a link in the show notes, audio and video platform. We're talking Zags 24/7. We will be talking throughout the Olympics when that comes around as well. So come hang out if you haven't already. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.